Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about shadow work and inner child work and inner work and spiritual development and all those lovely things. So in case you haven't seen our podcast before, I'll introduce myself. My name is Melanie Stevens. I'm a spiritual mentor, Reiki master and tarot reader. I'm based in Devon in the UK. And Kat, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. So I'm Kat. I'm also based in UK, in Swindon. I'm a spiritual medium and healer. All of our details are in the description, by the way, if you'd like to contact us at all.
Wonderful. Okay, so I suppose if we kick off by just talking about, we'll start with shadow work and then we'll see where we go, because it's quite a big topic really, and Kat and I were just talking before about the inner work encompassing shadow work, as well as many other things that if you follow a spiritual path, you're probably going to stumble across this at some point and wonder what it's all about. So shadow work being quite popular, something that a lot of people look to do, we'll start there just by describing sort of what it is and what it means to do shadow work. So the term the shadow self was coined by Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. And when he talked about the shadow self, he was talking about the parts of us which are repressed, suppressed, buried, pushed down, ignored. And you might think, well, why have we got parts of us that we don't allow? And a lot of the shadow self is created by our upbringing. So when we're brought up, we're taught things by our parents, we're taught things by teachers, we're taught things by the society that's around us, by the media, ways to behave, ways not to behave, ways that get you love and attention, ways that get you punished or ignored. And this is what creates what we decide to put in our shadow and bury from the world, and the bits of us that we decide are socially acceptable and loving and people will like. So that's what causes the shadow. So hopefully that's sort of explained what it is. The sorts of things you might find there, I think giving examples is always really helpful with things like this. So if you were brought up as a little boy, hopefully this doesn't happen anymore, but people my age, little boys were often told to sort of not show their sensitive side. They were told not to cry. They've got to be brave. They've got to be a brave little soldier. Even that language, soldier, bringing in fighting and war. Boys were sort of very often taught to be strong and brave and not cry. So many men now have in their shadow sensitivity and crying and showing emotion, because they were shamed maybe when they got upset or told, oh no tears, you've got to be strong. And so they thought, oh, okay, this isn't the way to behave. I need to bury that part of me because it's not acceptable, because I'm a man and I have to be strong. So there's an example. It might be that when you were a child, your parents taught you to be quiet and behave yourself and not be loud or showy, because they didn't want you to behave in a certain way so that people would think you were a brat and you were spoiled. So that showy, loud part of us, the expressive part of us, might have been buried because we were taught to sit quietly and draw and play and be nice children. So we might have buried that. We may have been spiteful to a sibling, and we were told not to be nasty and not to be spiteful and not to push somebody when they've upset us. And so we push that part of ourselves into our shadow. So that there can be some unpleasant things in the shadow. There can be some things that you've buried because you're happy that they're buried, but there can be some things in the shadow that would be quite useful to bring up and integrate. But we can't really pick and choose when we start doing this work. We really need to look at what's there, welcome what's there, show love to what's there, so that we're not ashamed of any parts of us, so that when those parts of us do try and come up, they don't feel quite so uncomfortable, because we just recognize that they're just parts of the human experience. And we're not designed as humans to be perfectly well behaved all the time. We've got things that anger comes up. Anger is, I think, in a lot of people's shadow, because we weren't encouraged to be angry when we were growing up. But actually, anger is healthy. If something makes you feel angry, maybe there's a good reason why you feel angry. Maybe that's your body reacting to somebody trying to push you around or hurt you. And then that can make it very difficult to deal with confrontation if we've buried anger, because we don't allow ourselves to feel it. And actually burying parts of us is what causes mental health problems, because these parts are still there. We haven't got rid of them, and they try and come up and we push them back down. And then what does that cause? Mental conflict, shame, because there's just all this stuff that's trying to just be felt and just be heard and be allowed to be as a normal, fully functioning human being.
Yeah, that's very good description. And I was telling Mel at the beginning before we went live that I, will be sharing maybe my understanding of shadow work, because I actually haven't worked with that term much. I always kind of approached it with the lens of things like spiritual development, or not even spiritual, it's just like personal development and inner child work, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I was thinking the other thing that I would maybe add to this, or what I found to understand, what I understand to be shadow work, are also things that, so because you mentioned a lot about how our personalities, for instance, wanted to come out, and we would, as a child, we would try things out, let's say, try things out in terms of our emotional expression, whether it's leadership, anger, where we just obviously lived naturally in response to how we're feeling, and then we would have been shamed or, put down or told not to do this because it's not socially acceptable, or you're not going to be liked and all that stuff. But I thought I would add another layer maybe onto that, where I feel shadow work encompasses all the things as well that we feel shameful about, maybe because we've experienced something that was traumatic, very much overwhelming and violating to us. And we were feeling shame or guilt around that. So not necessarily because we just naturally feel shame, but it could be shame because we maybe let someone or something use us in a way that we didn't feel was comfortable. That would encompass many taboo topics, because in whichever society you live in, or whether you're also, because I think culture, mentality of the place, like society that you live in, as well as religious beliefs, would put a lot of cloak over many topics that are called taboo, because they're either sinful or, whatever language you want to use, or just, we don't talk about this stuff, you don't talk about this stuff. So everything that's very natural to a human experience is being put in the shadow, and called something that's, that's bad, right? So putting a label of bad onto something. So oftentimes, I suppose it's not even just the beliefs and then the attitudes that we live on are kind of kept in check. But also, if we have been, like I said, through an unfortunate experience that related to a taboo topic, we feel very ashamed to speak about those things. Or even, it's not even speaking, but just acknowledging that something might have happened. And although it's considered by society or family or whatever shameful in any way, it still happened and it should be talked about. And the feelings and the very low negative feelings involved with that situation have to be felt and processed and talked about. And yet it's really difficult, well, because of all the reasons that I've just given. So I kind of felt like shadow work would also encompass all of that. So a lot of times we would, as well as we bury all of the unliked, let's call it emotions, by our environment, we also bury all of the icky feelings and emotions relating to any sort of situations or encounters with people that left us in some way traumatized or overwhelmed, or somehow violated. And these are all difficult topics. I feel like the whole shadow work and inner work kind of it encompasses work on discovering who we are and what impulses we naturally have. Like you said, maybe someone's a little bit more fiery than the other person, and so they show their anger a little bit more often, and they've been put down for that. The other person might be more emotional as a water sign. Maybe they cry a lot. That's me. Same thing. Just to share a bit of myself. I definitely personally had a lot of I think natural way of being for me. I have definitely put that back into my shadow because you know who likes a crying person in a general, whether you're a boy or a girl, however you identify. A lot of intense emotions are not very well received by others, right? It's just that you might be called different things depending on whether you're showing anger or whether you're showing another emotion, right? But then also, so that's like one layer. So you're trying to uncover who you really are, what are your natural impulses, and you once it all comes out, let's say, and you're kind of aware of them and you acknowledge them, it doesn't mean that they have to rule your life in a destructive way, right? It might feel like that at first, to be honest. I felt that whenever I let myself be just who I am, because there was so much that was buried, at first it feels very intense, and it's like everything just comes out, and it has to come out, and it comes out, and then maybe a little bit too much of a volume than you would really want, and it feels a little bit maybe uncontrollable. But that's just all of the, how do you call it, it everything that was pushed down has to come out. It's basically whatever was pushed down doesn't mean that it disappeared. It just means that once you open that can, it will come out with bigger intensity until it's all cleared. That's how I kind of see it. Um, and then whenever you're ready, and I feel once you've done work on yourself and you've built some confidence and acceptance and love towards yourself, you might be then ready to maybe look at the other aspects of your life that were caused, like I mentioned before, by situations that were out of your control and not really related necessarily to your personality. But you again buried them down somewhere far, far away, and yet you never healed them.
Yeah, and that's the shadow is caused by many things, and you touched on religion. That can definitely cause a lot of stuff to go into the shadow that then causes us to feel ashamed, because we when we are children, we just react to everything. We don't push anything down. We push things down because of what's happening around us, because of learning that this gets that sort of reaction and that gets that sort of reaction. As we grow older, we then choose sometimes to push things into our shadow ourselves because they're too uncomfortable. There's loads of horrible feelings around them. Like if you've been a victim and you feel shame, you push it down. This is why talk therapy is so important, because just bringing it up and talking about it and acknowledging it and feeling the pain, that's what healing is. It's that simple. It's just bringing it up and allowing it to be, because if we don't allow it to be, it does sabotage us. And yes, it's painful, but it's short-lived usually. Just talking to people, or using therapy or using Reiki, EFT, whatever you want to use, means you're not hiding it. You're bringing it up, and you can do that in a safe space on your own if you want to. It's the bringing it into the light that's important.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. Whenever if we don't address something, we don't talk about it because we feel that it's too painful to talk about something or work on something. Again, it depends on whether you're working with someone else or you're just doing it by yourself. You might feel that it will never end because it's just too hard to think about even. But that's the sort of paradox, I suppose, that actually it's the other way around. You have to let it out because otherwise the intensity will keep on building up,
Yeah.
except it won't be maybe on the surface, it's not affecting your life, you'd think, right? But actually, it very much does because it's a very driving, it's a strongly driving force behind your actions, your beliefs. We might think that our beliefs aren't affected, but they are so affected very strongly. And through our beliefs, obviously, our actions follow, but also health, whether it's mental health, physical health. I think we've touched upon that slightly in the spiritual awakening talk, podcast, where we talked about how emotional, suppressed, maybe suppressed emotions can affect our physical health as well, which we might not realize.
Yeah, definitely, in a big way, in a big way. And I think underneath a lot of physical health conditions is a lot of
Mm-hmm.
emotion, suppressed emotion somewhere that just wants to be felt and wants to be heard. And also when you're doing the shadow work, and I just want to point out that doing shadow work doesn't mean you suddenly have to show the world all of your
Yeah.
hidden parts. Like, you don't have to be, oh, I've got all this in my shadow, I'm going to tell everyone about it. I did mine very privately on my own. I didn't do it with a therapist. It was me and a journal, and I used somebody else's journal, and I'm producing one that I'm going to be doing for people as well, with prompts. And that's really, it's prompts, it's questions to get you to answer the questions and remember. And that's all it takes to bring stuff up. It is a bit uncomfortable. It wasn't an easy process, but I learned so much from doing that, about myself and about the way I react sometimes unconsciously, or the feelings I get unconsciously, which don't make any sense in the moment. And I think, why has that made me angry? That doesn't make sense. I'm not angry. There's something there. And you dig that up and you explore it. But also, a big part of shadow work is, by becoming more understanding of our own suppressed behaviors and emotions and feelings, we understand them in other people, and our triggers when other people say that or do something that makes us feel ashamed or disgusted or shocked or horrified or
Mm-hmm.
angry. It's because that behavior they are displaying is within us, but we've buried it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we get people say, when you're triggered by somebody, they're doing something that's within you. And I used to struggle with that because I used to think I would never do what that person's doing. But that's true, because I've pushed whatever that person's doing so overtly without caring. I've pushed down and shamed. I've been like, no, I would never display that sort of behavior. And they're displaying it. That's what causes that trigger. That's why I feel angry. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel anything. Some people irritate me, some people don't. And we're all different, and that's because it's a reflection of what's in our shadow buried that we see in somebody else, and that feels uncomfortable to us.
Yeah. And that's where you kind of need to start building compassion towards yourself. It's one of the things that I suppose is the effect of shadow work, is building compassion towards ourselves, and as an extension, we then are more compassionate towards others. So, in this example that you used, where you would be triggered by someone else's behavior, in the past, maybe it would have been a very strong, intense trigger, feeling almost, like you said, maybe angry that they even did that, or, any sort of emotion, uncomfortable emotion that, rises up in you that maybe is so much more intense, compared to when you have, let's say, worked through it and you have built that compassion. And then you just know that we're all human. So whenever, if you then behave in a similar way, let's say down the line, you're not going to feel ashamed of it or guilty. It's just, okay, well, that was silly, but let's move on. And in the same way, you would then react probably to others displaying such behavior. You wouldn't, doesn't mean you have to like it or approve of it, but it won't have such an effect on you emotionally anymore, or your state of being at that moment.
Exactly. And I think our compassion towards other people's behavior is directly related to the self-compassion that we feel. And by if we are constantly judging or shaming other people for their behavior, that's because we're ashamed of the behavior that's within us, and that's why we buried it in the first place, and that's why it ends up in the shadow. So practicing self-compassion when you're unearthing these things from the shadow is really important. But you will notice then the more compassion you show for yourself, you will naturally show it for other people, because you've done the work on you first. And you recognize that, okay, I didn't like that sort of behavior, but it's a part of the human psyche that's also within me. I've just chosen to bury it. This person has not chosen to bury it. Perhaps they had a different upbringing, perhaps they've got a different culture. That's usually all it comes down to. It just makes it less intense when we get triggered, because we kind of understand why we're triggered, and we're like, okay, I can understand why that's wound me up a little bit, and we just let it go. So it causes less harsh judgment of other people.
And we understand the differences between people, and that we're all unique, and we shouldn't measure each other by our own measures, basically, because we're all so different based on where we're born, but also just personality wise. You can from the whole global view, I suppose, in the whole world, and then you can literally put the microscope to where you live and the difference between you and your neighbor. So, and we're all meant to be like that, and it's been for a long time sort of taught to us that we need to fit in a certain way based on where you live, so that we are all the same almost. But it's just impossible, and it just creates all of these issues, basically.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, that there are things that are seen as, socially acceptable. There are things that are seen as likable, but there are also, things that are really not acceptable, like going around murdering people and things like that. But we have laws to cover things like that. So there are some elements that are a natural part of being part of a community. There are expectations that you won't go around screaming at people and punching them in the face.
Definitely.
That by integrating the shadow, it's okay to go around and punch everybody in the face.
No, exactly.
Do that. It's just understanding the emotions and the feelings that we have. You can still choose not to act on them. It's recognizing and acknowledging them.
Yes, exactly.
Not just blindly burying them without giving them any second thought.
Yes, definitely. So it definitely doesn't mean that you are then becoming tolerant to everything, right?
No.
It's just working on the level of our personality, I suppose, and the way we are, without causing hurt and pain to others. Let's just clear that up, because
And sometimes you may want to hurt somebody else, but that doesn't mean act on it. But just recognize, I felt angry in the moment, and I felt like I wanted to lash out. I acknowledged the anger. I let it come up. I screamed into a pillow. I did whatever I needed to have that cathartic release, and now the anger is gone. It's just recognizing that and allowing it in a safe way.
Yeah, and not feeling ashamed. I think you said that. Sorry, about feeling a certain way, right? I'm sorry if I'm like repeating.
No, not at all.
But okay, cool. So, do you have any ways or ideas? I don't know how people could work with their shadow self. I mean, do you have any? I personally, I never actually employed any sort of specific practice. I don't think, like, for instance, I didn't look how to work on your shadow self, and they suggested journal, and so I journaled, kind of thing. I kind of went by how I feel at the moment. So there was a long time, for instance, where I didn't really feel like even writing stuff down, because even that felt a little bit, it's a bit much for me to even, which then gave me an idea, okay, looks like there's quite a bit to maybe work through, or just give myself a little bit of more time, a little bit more patience until I feel like I'm ready maybe to even write stuff down. But then after a while, it kind of felt more comfortable. And so I started a little bit of journaling, for instance, I don't know. Do you have any other ways that you have found to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I did I bought a journal with the specific purpose to dive into my shadows. So I made a conscious decision, like I'm going to look at this, I'm going to work with this, rather than just noticing when things come up. So, and the journal contained those prompts to get me to really think about all different things: culture, religion, what's seen as socially acceptable, how was I as a very young child, how was I as I got older, what are my beliefs, and questioning everything, really. So that's why I'm working on a course at the moment to bring that together for people. The journaling bit for me was wonderful, but I could have done with just a little bit more of a steer on what I was doing and why I was doing it. So I'm working on a video course with examples and teachings about the shadow, so that people know how to do it, with some sort of workbook or some exercises that people need to do. But it is a self-reflective course. You can give the prompts, but people are going to react to that very differently. So it will be there's no set time limit on the course. You might pick it up and run with it for 3 weeks and then think, I need a break from that for a few weeks and then come back to it. Some people will have a lot of stuff in their shadow around their family. They might find their family very triggering. So there's a lot of stuff there to work on. Other people will hardly have any in that section and will sort of move to the next, but maybe their school life was really tough and they'll have stuff there. So it's a very unique journey, but I think to start it, you need somebody to explain what it is, how to do it, and give those prompts, those tweaks, those nudges to get your own. You've got to ask the right words to get the stuff to come to the surface so that you can then explore it. So a lot of it is questions and prompts and exercises and things that you can do to work on in your own time and at your own pace. So that's what I'm working on, and I will have that finished. It will be this month. I don't know when, because it's quite a big project. It's taken me longer than I originally anticipated, but it will be finished this month. And that will go on probably on my website for people to be able to access, download, and work at their own pace, working through it. And of course, shadow work is one element, and what I'm starting to do is bring in elements of self-care and self-love into that course, because you do need to have a heap of compassion for yourself as you're working through this stuff. Some of it can be quite painful. And then there's inner child work as well, which we mentioned earlier, which is another form of inner work that goes quite nicely actually with shadow work when we visit our inner child. Have you done any inner child work yourself?
Yeah, I think it was just a combination or an extension of just doing shadow work, because you might find, I say you in general, might find that when you start doing shadow work, it's just a lot of inner child stuff comes out, because a lot of this stems from our childhood. That's where we were first told about certain behaviors, or told off for certain behaviors, or experienced uncomfortable situations and all of that stuff, and we were too young to know how to deal with them. So our emotions would just probably take over, and be the driving force for everything, because we would just feel a lot of feels, but not necessarily know how to manage them and what they mean and what to do with them, and we didn't have the experience and the knowledge of also maybe clear communication. So if it was something maybe that we wanted to share with our parents, for instance, and the response wasn't very positive, I mean, probably the way we maybe tried to explain something wasn't very, very easily understood, just quite emotionally driven. So I think, for instance, so the things that I did, because I was, and I still am, developing in all of the practices of mediumship, connecting with angels, but also reading Akashic records. I, whenever I would, let's say, practice, or I try to develop a certain ability or skill, each of these modalities, let's say, they kind of required from me to address something. So, for instance, in mediumship, they always tell you need to trust yourself, right? So then, if you don't trust yourself, then why not? And then it has to uncover all of these things, because unless you trust yourself, then you won't be as good of a reader as maybe you could be, because you're really doubting, and you don't feel like you know enough, or you don't, whatever, fill in the gaps. It could be so many things. So you have to, it's almost like through this whole development, I had to address a lot of things. So I think that was kind of incorporated, and some of it would stem back to childhood. Once, when I was practicing reading from my own Akashic records, I had a question about something, and I was again transported back to my childhood, and the certain behaviors or things that happened. And so I kind of cleared it that way. Yeah, I think it just, for me, it was just a result of the work and development that I was doing, not necessarily because I, searched for inner child work. Because I know you can do that if someone feels like they had a lot of hurt during their childhood, and it's very maybe even obvious, because it's not always obvious, and they know they need to address a few things. You can search for inner child work practices, ideas, and actually sit down and just deal with that. But I feel like whether you're developing as a medium actually or not, things will come up in your life, and if you're self-aware enough, you will start asking questions, and it might lead you back to your childhood, most likely.
Yeah, and I think we come to stuff like this when we're ready to do it as well, don't we? I mean, it's not something that I think everybody should, drop everything and let's start all doing inner child work. You get a feel that I want to do that. You get intrigued by it. And I did it same way as the shadow work. I got a journal full of prompts and did the same thing. And it was like you said about exercises. You can write a letter to your younger self. You can visit your younger self in a meditation and actually go back and have a conversation with you as a child, which is still you now. And that's why we talk about the inner child. That child is still within you now. It's still a part of you. And go back and have a conversation. What would you have liked to have heard when something bad happened to you when you were younger? What would you like to have been told when you were getting bullied at school or whatever it was? And you can go back and revisit that part of you that's still, and really it's the same as shadow work. What you're aiming to do is connect into that frightened child that's still somewhere within your energy, and comfort it and heal it and bring it to the surface. Because once we've done that, it doesn't sabotage us anymore, because it's all part of the healing journey. It's just finding what's buried within us that perhaps was a bit uncomfortable at the time, and we pushed it down and we just got on with our lives. But there's something still there that needs to be explored through journaling or through visualization or meditating, even just in a dream, going to visit that little girl or little boy or whoever, and just bringing up that emotion that might still be lurking around a traumatic incident. And it doesn't have to be traumatic as in something really major. It could just be that you got shouted at by a teacher and it frightened you. But as a child, you might not have known how to deal with that. So you'd have just gone, oh, that's horrible. And that emotion is still there. And that's all this work is for, is to bring up what wants to be seen and felt, so that once we've brought it to the surface and explored it, it does actually just dissipate, and it goes, and then it doesn't sabotage us anymore.
Yeah, I just thought I'll add a little bit of trauma, because that's a very good point. Trauma doesn't mean that something really huge had to happen to you in your life, or not even to you. Okay, it could be someone close in your family or your friends. And I liked the description that I think psychiatrist or someone I was listening to an interview with has explained what trauma is, because you can have a macro trauma, which is a huge life event, or a micro trauma, and we all have micro traumas throughout our lives, because trauma really is a situation that that just goes beyond your capacity to deal with it. So it's something that you're very much overwhelmed by, and you just don't have the skill or the knowledge or maturity, whatever, to deal with it. So it kind of catches you off guard.
Mm.
Okay, and it's usually not pleasant, in some way. So it could be literally anything. And we all, and also, if one other thing that's coming to my mind is that often we might not realize that we have been traumatized, because there might have been micro traumas throughout our life that were just, in a way, part of our life, and so we got used to it. It felt normal, and so we didn't realize, that is what is happening, and yet we were still living through maybe that, I don't know, period of time in our life, with fear or overwhelm, or just that feeling of inability to deal with something, because we just don't know how to, and it just overwhelms us. So that's what really trauma is, and there could be many, many instances of that in our life. And also, you mentioned the inner child work, and we've been sort of focused on all of the maybe darker, heavier situations, but inner child work also encompasses us connecting back to that joyous self, to that self that is actually in wonder of the world and is very curious about little things. As adults, we are very much preoccupied with, how are we going to pay the bills? Is my job good, and does it pay me enough? We probably are more worried about this sort of stuff, and we forget to notice all the beauty in the little things that can bring us joy in everyday life. And that's how being a child is, right? Looking at children, you can see that they can have a very deep belly laugh out of something super small, right? It's
Still
really
do.
endearing and sweet to look at children, just how strongly they react to such little things. And it doesn't go away. That ability doesn't go away. We just start becoming, and I'm putting it in air quotes, becoming mature and adults,
Mhm.
right? And we might feel silly, like a child. Oh, what are you, a child? When you just find joy in little things, and maybe you're too positive or something. I don't know, whatever we all hear around us. And so we don't allow ourselves to bring that side out of us, and just be joyful and happy and careless sometimes. Just do things just because, without this whole cloud of doubt, and oh, what could go wrong if I do this and that. So those are all of the energies, and that we can still tap into as adults. It's just, you know our choice to do so, or not. But
Yeah,
that also involves inner child work. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a really good point. And it's the same with the shadow. It's not all bad stuff that lurks down there. Some of it's really would be really useful, and we don't even realize we've got these
Mhm.
potential and abilities that we perhaps weren't encouraged to show, or perhaps something went wrong when we tried to show
Mm.
leadership as a child. So we just thought, oh, I won't do that again, and so we buried it. And if you can bring that stuff up, there's some real gold to be found there. And the same with the inner child, that spontaneity and that living in the present moment disappears as we become programmed by our surroundings, by society, etc., etc. But we've still got that part of us inside that we can tap into, where we don't care about the past or the future, because we never thought about that when we were kids. We just did something because it was fun. If it wasn't fun, we didn't do it. So that part of us is still there, that bubbling little joyful part of us. It's just been buried amongst layers of
Mm.
rubbish that we
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of things like our passions and things that make us happy. You know,
Yeah.
maybe as a child, someone loved to draw, and then after a while, you know, someone life has told them in many ways that you need to find something more serious, or you know, something, you know, this is not a serious job or whatever it is, and we just leave it because, you know, we just feel we're not gonna be able to pursue our passions and interests. So we can find a lot of our childlike joy in our hearts in terms of what we feel drawn to do, what brings us joy, and actually let ourselves do those things. And also, I wanted to mention, as you said, it's not all the bad stuff that are in the shadow, it's also the good stuff. And that kind of made me think about how the shadow work or inner child work can reframe those things for us as well. So, for instance, so I mentioned mine was crying, and I don't mind mentioning that, like, publicly, because I'm definitely not ashamed of it. There we go. Right. But you know, it might have felt for a long time that it's a weakness, and so you hide it away. I definitely did, my emotionality, and then only after a while, when I really looked at it, I actually realized that that's my strength. It's not just because someone or something, you know, called it in a certain way, it made me feel inferior by being emotional and maybe displaying my emotion. I actually realized through this work that it's actually my strength. The sensitivity is my strength because that helps me be loving and compassionate towards others and towards myself. So it kind of, you know, it really helps you reframe, because reframe all of the labels maybe that were put on you, because you might have a negative association with a specific part of you, that someone else actually might not see it in the same way. You know, like, I think a good example again, anger. Someone would say, you're such an angry person, for instance, and so you've thought of yourself as being angry for a long time, and then once you do all this work, you realize, actually, I'm not angry, I'm just fiery. I have a lot of passion, I care about a lot of things, and so that's how I display it. You know, it's, and then it kind of becomes like a play on words almost, because unless you look at it from a different perspective, you kind of, it's almost like it might even help you to deal with it better. And maybe if it was something that you couldn't, let's say, control in the past, maybe you had so much anger, or someone said, you know, you're very angry or whatever, and so you kind of took it upon yourself, oh, I'm just an angry person, I have so much anger in me, and people don't like me because of that, and blah blah blah, and then so it goes. And then you realize, hang on a minute, actually, I was just always really passionate about a particular subject. So it displayed in the intensity of a feeling that maybe felt a little bit overwhelming, or a little bit aggressive to others, but it wasn't my intention, right? So if you now, let's say you have this awareness, and you can actually behave slightly differently within the same situation, doesn't mean that you have to push that passion and fiery energy down. You just express it differently. You might use different words when, you know, when this surge of passion comes, for instance, so that the other person, you know, if someone's in your company doesn't feel threatened in any way, you just say, look, I'm just really passionate about this, this is why, this and this. And it already builds different relationships and different understanding, communication with other people, so we could all stop calling each other names and getting offended and threatened, and you know, all of these things.
I think that's a really good point. I just made a couple of comments there, just wrote them down, because we talked recently about words having power and some words having a negative connotation because of our perception of them. And what is the difference between being angry or fiery or passionate? But we see passionate or fiery as perhaps more positive, and maybe just rephrase how we're describing ourselves if we feel any sort of shame about how we are. If somebody's accused us of being a show off or showy or boisterous, maybe we're extrovert, maybe we're expressive. It's just a different way of calling it. It's the same thing. But if somebody is offended by your behavior, then that's because it's either it's in them and they're triggered by you, but actually it's not your problem why they're offended by you. That's up to them to do the work on themselves and reflect that back on themselves. If they're uncomfortable in your presence and you find yourself having to play down your personality, I would say find new people to hang around with, because you should never need to do that. And there will be people who are comfortable in your presence, who thrive on your energy. We're just slightly different there, and we just need to find our sort of the people that we vibe with, that we feel comfortable to be ourselves around, where we're not trying to make adjustments to our natural personality and our natural character.
Exactly, that's a very good point that you made. People might be offended by your behavior, and then it can create a complex within you of some sort. But because you behaved in a certain way, it doesn't. I think behind the behavior, intention is the most important. So if someone is, let's say, loud and obnoxious, or someone would call them that way, but their intention is, like you said, they're just being very expressive. Um, Sorry, I just got just one more other thing that I in my mind.
Yeah, no worries.
Stopped me from finishing first sentence. I get like this quite a lot because I start thinking about astrology. And how astrology really helps in understanding ourselves and how we are, because we have 12 signs in astrology, and then there are so many relationships between each planet that can create a different type of temperament, personality, character, and all of these things. And because it's meant to be that way. So I think for instance, many zodiac signs have a bad rep. They have created somehow in the world they have this bad rep because mostly because of their, I don't know, intensity, I suppose, because some people are not able to deal with it. But that's not your problem, really, as long as you have, again, a loving intention, because we're not talking about behavior that is malicious intentionally in any way. We're just talking about intention. If you're just being yourself, you're happy about yourself, for instance. Leo sign comes to my mind because they are known to be quite proud. Again, depending on what words you use, who wrote the book or who wrote the description depends on how they see you, right? Does it offend them or does it not? So Leos might be called proud and pompous or whatever, but actually no, they're very self-expressive. They're very warm, with a big heart, and yes, they do like the attention. But what's wrong with that, really? I mean, someone might have a problem with that, but that's again their problem. So we just need to remember that we're not for everyone. No one is for everyone, and that is okay. So if you're in the company of someone who doesn't approve, or let's say doesn't feel comfortable about your personality, and they maybe try to put you down or try and create a comment, and in some way they have an authority. So I think a lot of that happens maybe when you have teachers, right, that would I don't know, comment on your behavior, or someone that you're meant to be looking up to. So someone of authority, right? Teacher, parents, I don't know. And then you just feel bad because they said that it's wrong. And then I suppose it kind of, sure, you might need to learn to navigate around people that are, responding negatively to you, but it doesn't mean that you need to start changing yourself in any way. Just because someone's offended by your behavior doesn't mean there's something wrong with your behavior. It's an important point to remember. And I just wrote down a little note because as we were talking about this, I just remembered I was watching a little video about children. So this was, when I say children, this was, I think the right word is toddler. So a little toddler over 1 year old, I think they're toddlers, 2 years, when they
Children.
start expressing themselves emotionally. And there was this very short video shown of how the mother was videoing, making a video of herself with her baby on her arms, and they were cuddling and, having a lovely time. um, and then the mother went over and wanted to give a kiss to the baby, and the baby responded very like no, like very angry, and I think it was the lady who was like a child psychologist or something was showing this as an example where the mother would probably feel hurt or offended because, I mean, mothers, they just want to love their child all the time. And yet the child is responding so negatively. And the psychologist was saying it's not that the child now doesn't like you and you should feel bad, or maybe you're a bad mother now or whatever. The child is basically experimenting with their boundaries, but they're so young in their development, they don't worry yet about your response in any way. It's just a very natural reaction. The baby was not ready for a kiss right this second. It didn't want it. And then like I don't know, 1 minute later, it actually did lean in and was like, okay, now we can have a kiss kind of thing. So the child is just practicing their boundaries with you, but that doesn't in any way mean that there's anything wrong with you, like
No,
for
and it's
the
funny though, because you wouldn't think there was if a child just said, and this is the spontaneity of a child. If a child just says, no,
Mm,
I don't want to cuddle, I don't
yeah,
want to kiss, leave me alone, you wouldn't question that child's motives. Oh, the child hates me. Oh, I've done something to offend them, because they're a child. They don't think like that. If that was somebody older that said, oh, I don't want you to give me a cuddle, why? What have I done? Have I offended you? You're angry with me. What have I done
yeah,
wrong? Tell me what I've done wrong. And you demand to know why you've offended them, and they might just be like, I just don't want to cuddle. You haven't done anything wrong. I just said no because it was an instinct
yeah,
reaction, because I just don't want to cuddle right now. Whereas when it's a baby, we accept that right now they're just expressing themselves. Actually, no, you're in my face and I don't like it. Leave me alone a bit.
yeah.
But when
But
it's
then,
somebody else, we get this neurosis start. Oh, I've offended them. I've done something. They hate me. They don't want me near them. And we worry more. And yet, why?
mhm.
Why can't we just instinctively just say, no, I don't want to?
Well, that's the thing, because at some point as a child, probably when we start being able to talk, and kind of interact with people better, parents do start telling us off when we display behavior that might be a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit hurtful to someone else, like an adult especially, I think. For instance, oh, this is a good example that just popped in my mind. I think a lot of times, for instance, I don't know, the parents ask they want their child to be polite, and the way we greet each other, adults usually, if you're maybe in UK, Poland, for sure that happens, we would come with a cuddle or a kiss on the cheek, which is quite close. You're really coming into somebody's personal space. And many children, they don't want that. They feel they are way more open and sensitive. They might not want to, they don't feel comfortable being so close with someone, with a stranger especially. And yet the parents are, come on, give, whatever, this person a kiss, give them a hug. And when you don't, you're like berated and saying, don't be rude. And we're almost like put in a position where we have to ignore our sense of personal space because
Mm.
we have to, because we're told. So then we kind of grow up with that, and there are, I'm sure, many examples like this one that we just have ingrained in us because our parents told us off. And so as an adult, we then would, feel bad if someone doesn't want to give us a cuddle, like the example you just gave, right? Because
Mm.
it's like it's polite to. So if it's polite, then why can't you give me a cuddle or whatever, and just understanding those boundaries and the fact that we might be feeling in a different way, and it doesn't mean anything. We're not trying to offend you. It's just the way I feel, it's very neutral to you. But it's difficult for us to comprehend and kind of get on board with that, because we've been so programmed again to display behaviors that are against our natural instincts sometimes, or against our needs even.
I know, and that is a really good example of putting somebody else's needs before yours because it's polite. And no wonder we've got so many people pleasers and people who can't stand up for themselves and weak boundaries. And it's not blaming anybody. We've been like this for God knows how long. Humans have just been like, oh no, you've got to, behave in a certain way. And if we were all true to how we truly felt, and somebody came to give us a hug and we just said, no, I don't want you in my space, and we weren't offended by that because we've been taught just to express yourselves, we just go, all right. And there wouldn't be any problem. But because of how we've been brought up to think, oh, that's rude to do that, that means they'll think you don't like them, that's what causes our
you
own,
don't like them or you don't love them, or right.
And then that causes our own neurosis of, oh, why didn't that person want to hug me? That person froze when I hugged them, that means they don't like me. Well, maybe they just don't like hugging. Some people are just not huggers, and that's okay.
yeah exactly. And and we can always learn, I suppose. As adults, we just have that awareness of what words we use, right? We still don't have to be rude with our words in that sense, but we can still communicate exactly the same thing. Yeah
It is funny. And different countries and different societies are going to have slightly different takes on this. And I've been all over Europe. One country I haven't been to and I really want to go to is Italy. And I've been told that the Italians are really expressive and they're really passionate, and they use the word passionate and fiery about the Italians, not angry, because they are just very expressive. And if somebody toots the horn at them, they'll shout at them or what have you, because that's just how they are. They've been allowed to be expressive. But from a British person's perspective, we might find that a little bit uncomfortable, because we're like, oh, this is a bit uncomfortable, everybody's been showy. And they're not. They're just expressing themselves. But we were taught, oh no, that's not likable. So it is funny. It's just the programming we've been given. It's not right or wrong,
depending on where you live in the world. And it's just so funny, that example, because I'm from Poland originally, so we are definitely more, I don't know, you could call it temperamental or expressive. Also, maybe not in the same way as Italians, although probably very similar actually. And then it was a little bit funny for me coming to UK, where everyone was just, or when you watch TV or films that are British, and they're especially based in like Victorian times, and where everything is just so controlled, everybody's emotion, so you watch them, and that that person is, for instance, aching, their heart is aching because they just looked a certain way with their eyes, and it's like this whole thing, but you don't actually see them expressing it much, because it's also shut down. And I've noticed a difference where, for instance, in a workplace, we would interact, and there was a girl who is also, she wasn't, I don't think she was Polish, she might have been Czech, but we're pretty much similar. And she was coming on quite strong, some people might say. They would use these words. But I didn't feel her coming on strong. She's just being herself openly. So she had a lot of strength and power in her personality, and she would come in with this power and strength. She wouldn't make herself smaller, but that wasn't offensive in any way, like, because it wasn't directed to anyone. It was just her energy. And yet people at work would find her intimidating and a little bit too much. And I was seeing a lot of that kind of happening in the workplace, and it was just an interesting observation for me to see how people read you, what they see in you, even though it's not really a rude behavior in any way, or intentionally trying to offend someone, or I don't know. It's just how you are, and how expressive and open with your energy you are, really.
And that's a perfect example of like the shadow self, because you weren't triggered by her. She didn't make you angry because you understood her to be expressing herself, because you equally had perhaps a similar environment around you when you were growing up, and you understand, oh, it's similar to Poland, and it didn't trigger you. People who got triggered by her have that part of themselves buried in their shadow because they were told to repress it. And that little part of them really wants to come up and be expressive as well, but they don't allow it. And so she openly expressing herself and, you know, maybe being feisty, maybe being fiery or passionate or whatever, made them feel uncomfortable. And that's why they got angry by her, but you didn't. Her behavior wasn't bad or good. Her behavior just was who she
basically.
is.
Yeah.
But they were triggered because they didn't like it, because it was uncomfortable due to their shadow. And you were just like, she's just normal.
Yeah.
Interesting when you, and that's a really good example of it, when, you know, why are some people triggered by some behaviors and some people aren't? It's because it's buried deep down beneath loads of layers, because it's been pushed there for a reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Such an interesting topic. I love it.
It really is. I really like it as well. And although even with the examples of expressiveness, being a little bit more maybe open with expressiveness and honesty, that's one other thing that Polish people are being commented on. Let's say that they are rude, but I don't see it. They're just honest. They just say what they think. Not with any malicious intent. It's just you ask them a question, they will tell you without the fluff around kind of thing. It's always a very interesting topic for me. So yeah, but we have come to a time, I think, to finish for today. But I hope it was enjoyable for whoever was listening live, and then whoever will listen on replay. As usual, let us know if you have any questions, comments, or would like to share your story, basically, about this. We would be very happy to hear what you think.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Kat.
Thanks, Mel. And we'll see you again soon.
See you soon.
Take care, everyone.